We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back here on Talking Liberty, Liberty Nation Radio with Scott DeCosenza. Now, Scott, the case I really want to talk about, and I think this is going to turn into one of the biggest stories of the year, and that is a bold statement for early January, but still one of the biggest stories of the year, is Donald Trump's immunity claims. Now, as we're recording, he's actually in a D.C. circuit courtroom making the case that he should be immune to the prosecutions of Jack Smith, special counsel Jack Smith, in the case related to January 6th. Do you think the D.C. judges will, just based on your knowledge of D.C. courts, do you think that they will deny his claims of immunity? Yes or no?
Before I give you an answer to your question, I think it's important to lay out what his claim is, because it's been wildly misrepresented.
Yes. It has.
That Donald Trump claims basically he can do any act and therefore and not be prosecuted for it because he was president of the United States.
Before you jump in on this, Scott, before you jump in, I do want to point out that on Fox News this morning, I was watching Fox News this morning, the day he goes to court, and the reporter on there, she mentioned that essentially the question that everybody's asking is that, well, if he gets immunity, surely a president in future will just be able to commit any crime. And I thought, that is the worst possible take. Please explain why.
And it's not what Donald Trump is asserting. What he is asserting is that when the president of the United States acts as president, they are immune from criminal prosecution for the acts of the presidency that they take in furtherance of the office, because that basically constitutes a kind of federal supremacy, if you will. So what Donald Trump means is in his filing, if he picks up the phone and says we should do this or that, or make a speech, for instance, not gun down a clerk at a 7-Eleven in order to rob the till after dark. Okay,
don't give Donald Trump ideas, Scott. Don't give Donald Trump ideas.
Claim of immunity.
Yep.
What the claim of immunity is, for instance, part of the prosecution of Donald Trump involves him not acting, meaning like they have said that his failure to pick up the phone and call whomever and say whatever after he realized there was violence at the Capitol building, in part constitutes his criminality. So, for instance, not doing that is the function of the executive. Who to call and how to address them in the execution of the duties of President of the United States heretofore has been the sole province of the President of the United States to decide. Mr. Smith thinks that there's some other legal standard involved, and part of Trump's claim against these charges is that immunity basis, that he can't be prosecuted for acts of the president.
So it seems to me that to successfully deny Donald Trump's claims of immunity, you have to sort of go into the existential world and say that there is an office of the president that doesn't involve the president, but it's an existing thing that requires care and attention.
Doesn't involve the person, right?
Yeah, it doesn't involve the person. But it requires care and attention from the person who is caretaking that office at a time, which kind of, it's almost that there's almost a philosophical bent to having to get your mind around this idea that Donald Trump was not in the office of the president. He was merely representing the office of the president, but he represented it in a bad way.
This is a good exercise for you to conduct because of your familiarity with the royals. I imagine there's a similar kind of vestige of the royal family, right, or the sovereign, regardless of whether it's the person who occupies that office.
Well, that's the thing. It actually there is an answer to that. It's because whatever family killed the last lot of the last family, I believe it was the Hanovers were the last one, or they married through into the Windsors, doing it backwards. Hanover, Windsor, Hanover, Stuart, Tudor, Lancaster, Norman Plantagenet.
Wow.
Just doing it backwards.
Go.
It rests with the family that beat up the last family, essentially. So it's the person. It's the person. It's not, there's not some sovereign thing that exists beyond. It's a person. It's a family there. And so
I thought it was like the crown.
Well,
what's
that's the
this
thing,
say?
right? The person who steals the crown is then the holder of the crown, right? So yeah, so the point here is that it's up in the court, it's up in the DC Circuit Court. Your thoughts
Oral
are
arguments are being presented as
oral
we
arguments
were.
being.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that they will say that Donald Trump is susceptible to prosecution on this and does not enjoy immunity.
Okay.
And I believe that there's a colorable legal argument for that. I mean, a lot of these issues surrounding Trump's prosecutions and legal wranglings over the ballot access issues as well, there are often valuable legal arguments on both sides. They're clouded by the kind of ridiculous politicizing of the issues. I think, and in some cases, those are generated. At their birth, they're kind of tainted in their conception with these political things. Like I think probably the Georgia prosecution, for instance, among other things, and Jack Smith's prosecution as well. But that doesn't mean that there aren't valuable or interesting, real legal issues at stake there. Whether, what the president is immune for instance, is an interesting question to me. And
can I delve into that a little bit, please, Scott? So I was considering earlier what crimes Donald Trump is seeking immunity from. And I was thinking that surely there's got to be a division in the types of crime. So, for example, obviously, as you said, he can't go to a 7-Eleven and gun down the cashier as much as he may want to. But what's happening is he's being charged with 91 different crimes over 4 indictments. And some of these are purely novel uses or applications of the law. And that strikes me as, if he's got immunity for anything, it would be for the cases where there's a novel application of the law, because there'd be nobody to say, you know what, Mr. Trump, you can't do that. President Trump, you can't do that. His advisors couldn't tell him, you can't do that, because that's going to run afoul of a law that's going to be novelly applied to you at some point in the future. Right. Does that make sense?
It does make sense that it's a problem. And the reason why is because of the tortured nature of how we got to where we are, which is to say that the federal government, as conceived, only had a very few criminal laws. The large majority of criminal prosecutions and prohibitions are at the state level. And of course, now the body of federal criminal laws is so large that scholars and researchers can't even produce with any kind of validity the total number of federal criminal laws. Like, what do we have to do to not be criminals in the United States? It's impossible for the average person to discern and determine.
Yeah, so I believe there's a book called 4 Felonies a Day or something.
Indeed, yeah, 4 felonies a day. And it documents how we all do commit these felonies because we don't even know what the law is, and they are away from the common law. So that's a great thing that you said to get me back on point, Mark, which is common law crimes are what our society started prosecuting. And you don't need to be a lawyer or read law books to know that you shouldn't burn someone else's houses down or rape or murder them, for instance. Okay, these are not the finer points that we need to discern. But for instance, how was Donald Trump to know that that the law required him? Because this is what Mr. Smith and Mr. Biden's prosecution team is alleging, that Donald Trump had the legal duty to pick up the phone and say certain words to certain people within the federal government, or then he was a criminal. That's literally part of their claim. So it is a novel application of the law and a novel claim against the president. And certainly I believe it was impressed upon the courts to satisfy a political need rather than a criminal justice need. And yet still, the question remains, what is the president immune from regarding local state and local prosecutors?
It's fairly clear that the DC Circuit Court won't say, you know what, Donald, you're in the clear, mate, on your way. I don't think that's going to happen. You don't think that's going to happen. Nobody seriously think that's going to happen. However, once that's done, it then goes to the Supreme Court, right?
An appeal, whether it's Mr. Smith or whether it's Mr. Trump, the loser at the DC Circuit Court of Appeals will file in the United States Supreme Court. Whether the Supreme Court then decides to take that case and rule on it, that may be another matter.
So give us a prediction, Scott. What happens at the Supreme Court?
Mark, that is, I don't issue predictions.
One day I'll get you to do
outrageous. My prediction is that the Supreme Court will try to draw some broad lines about presidential immunity, and also articulate, if the case reaches there on this basis, that the president is not required to pick up the phone and call anyone and do anything as a function of remaining a non-criminal.
Yeah, I think everybody's glad that could be the rule that, you're not required to do anything to stop being a criminal. Scott DiCosenza, we'll keep a close eye on this on the page of libertynation.com. Thank you ever so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's just about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests for today, Mr. Graham J. Noble, Chief Political Correspondent, and Legal Affairs Editor Scott DiCosenza for joining us, taking the time to inform and entertain. And of course, I'd like to thank you, the listeners at home, for tuning in for this each and every week. Thanks for being here. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.